Welcome all to the GEO Dialogue series on open knowledge. We are going to talk about open data and open access today. My name is Bente Liljaby. I'm going to be your host, and we have a wonderful panel of experts on the topic of open data and open access, and we have some very good examples. I have been in GEO for a very long time. That's all you need to know for now. I have been working on Earth observations and particularly fond of data management and making data interoperable so that we can make use of it. First, some house rules. We encourage you to ask questions and comment in the chat. And we call it a dialogue series because we want to have a dialogue. And most of the dialogue, or most of this time we are spending together, at least half of it will be a dialogue. And in between the short presentations that you will hear, we have polls. So we encourage you to participate in these polls as well. And since we are creating a community around openness, we want you to learn about you as well. So you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you are from, something you work on, etc., in the chat to warm up. Please remember to mute yourself when when you are having a presentation. We will give the floor to you at the end of the presentations, so that you can also ask the questions via microphone and video. But do ask questions as you hear, as they pop up in your head, and your comment as well during the presentation part. So today on the program, we start with the introducing an overview of the GEO Open Knowledge Statement and the focus of the current dialogue, and Marie-Françoise Vadreau will do that. Then we will dive into legal aspects, more specifically the GEO data licenses, licensing guidance with Derek Hansen. And we have a perspective from the GEO Indigenous Alliance also on open data, providing us a very important view on open data sharing. And we have a success story, an open data, open access in practice, humanitarian OpenStreetMap by Pete Masters. And then, as I said, a discussion. So with that, I think I will give the floor to you, Marie-Françoise, so we get in the right mood.
So last year, maybe some of you have attended the dialogues we have built on the data sharing and the data management principle from GEO. And this year, we want to support the upscale from GEO to go from open data to open knowledge. So my name is Marie-Françoise Vadreau. I work with the Open Geospatial Consortium. But why am I here? It's because I'm OGC representative at the GEO Program Board, and I'm a co-chair for the GEO Data Sharing and Management Subgroup, who is organizing this dialogue series. So you will find here at this link the Open Knowledge Statement, which is the starting point for this dialogue series, because in 2019, the GEO Secretariat initiated a statement on open science as part of the strategy for a results-oriented GEOs and GEO Knowledge Hub. So the idea was really to be effective and produce results. And then the draft has been developed by Marcus Konkol from ITC Open Science Officer, and the focus was very much open science and capacity building around open science. But then during the revisions, some people consider that open science could be enlarged, and this is how the title, but also the content, has moved from open science to open knowledge, because they considered that the open knowledge was more aligned with the GEO mission and vision, which aims at supporting decision-making and not only science. And this is why they have drafted this statement. And if you go to the statement, to the link which is here, you will see that it lists a lot of strategies to approach a collaborative world where we can share not only data and science, but more than that. And the definition from the Open Knowledge Foundation about open knowledge is that knowledge that is free to use, reuse, and redistribute without legal, social, or technological restrictions may be defined as open knowledge. And so here we built a robust commons where collaborative community can thrive and interoperability is really maximized. So you can see that with this definition, of course, if we redistribute without legal, social, or technological restriction, open data and open access is key. So these are all the different open strategies which are listed into the open knowledge statement. So we have open science, open access, citizen and participatory science, open data, open reproducible research, open software, open infrastructure, open hardware, open education, open evaluation, and diversity of knowledge. So with this dialogue series, we are going to review each of these different strategies. In the last one, mid of April, we have discussed about open knowledge and open science. And today we will focus on open access and open data. The next one, for your information, will be about open reproducible research. So this is the roadmap for all the dialogues, and I encourage you to save the dates which are here mentioned here. All the slides will be available, of course, on the Knowledge Hub afterwards. Like the dialogue series we have done last year, all the recordings are accessible on the GEO Knowledge Hub, and this will be the same for this dialogue series. Each dialogue brings some information about the theory and some examples and practice. So here the theory will be more presented by Derek and Diana and James, and the success story and example will be about OpenStreetMap. But we also always try to be applied, again, to be results oriented. So to go into the text, as it is defined into the statement for open data, it is defined as the data needed to reproduce scientific results or support public decision making, including data stemming from publicly funded endeavors, should be released publicly under an open license and follow the GEO data sharing and management principles. The FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, using human and machine readable data formats, the trust principle, transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology, using trustworthy repositories, and the CARE principles, collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. At the same time, the GEO data sharing principles recognize the legitimate reasons to manage data access according to applicable international instruments, national policies, and legislations. This means privacy, national security, and law enforcement. So this is how open data is defined into the statement. And open access, everyone should be able to fully access and reuse all open knowledge contents and components, such as scholarly publications immediately after publications, free of charge and without restrictions. All the education, open education will also be a topic for another dialogue. So now that you have this background, I think that you will see that the presentations you will have today with the 3-4 speakers completely fit these definitions, and that you will understand that they bring some highlights for you to be able to brainstorm and see how this can apply to your daily work and put it in action.
Thank you very much, Marie-Françoise. And we can dive directly into GEO data licensing guidance that has been developed, led by you, Derek. Derek Hansen from NOAA has a background from legal disciplines, and I'll give you the floor, Derek, now, so that you can introduce yourself a little bit before we are starting to dive into the legal or licenses more specifically.
Francois, thank you for that introduction. to this topic. That was very helpful. As Bente said, I'm Derek Hansen. I'm an attorney for the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We're a government agency that provides environmental data, collects environmental data, and then provides environmental products and information. And I've been a part of GEO since its beginning. I'm also the co-chair of the Law and Policy subgroup of the GEO Data Working Group. My co-chairs, I don't believe either one were able to make it today, but it's Dr. Leah Shanley has been intimately involved, and then Jordi Sandalinas as well. So I'm going to discuss the recently approved GEO data licensing guidance. And just to elaborate on the background that Marie provided a moment ago, really GEO was founded on full and open access to environmental or to Earth observation data. And for many years, describing it as full and open or open by default, sort of, us in the community understood what that meant, right? But I think in recent years, it's become clear that it provides insufficient legal certainty for many data users. We're also seeing a number of custom end user license agreements, or they might be called terms and conditions, that are very lengthy, right? And require a close legal review to understand. They often include legally problematic terms within them. And in my day job, I'm often asked to review those and to work through those with the data providers. That uncertainty and the lack of consistency across those data licenses creates barriers to data use. The international community is moving towards a solution of standard open data license to address that. And GEO as well has been moving towards that. The next slide here shows that sort of traces the foundations for this effort in existing GEO documents. The first, the GEO data sharing principles, uses that term open by default, right? That's foundational to GEO. It does allow the conditions of registration and attribution if required. And then more recently, as Marie Francois mentioned, that the statement on open knowledge, it also mentions to be released publicly under an open license. And then even more recently, the GEO data sharing and data management principles that were updated provide that data should specify a license, including the data that conforms to an open data license. So in light of this, the GEO Program Board asked the Law and Policy subgroup to develop guidance to GEO members and participating organizations on this subject. What are licenses? What licenses of the many that are available are consistent with the GEO data sharing principles? And how would we advise data providers and those that produce products as well to license their data and products so that they're consistent with the GEO data sharing principles? And so the guidance that we developed is pretty simple. It really points to 3 existing licenses. You can see here, 2 are from Creative Commons. 1 is a public domain dedication. Actually, the first 2 are forms of public domain dedications. And then the third, Creative Commons attribution, does require attribution, the condition of use. And then we say that the GEO members, participating organizations, and others that share open data should clearly license such data using only one of these licenses. Custom licenses should not be used, and the standard text should not be modified or augmented. And then I just have a link there to the direct, the full data licensing guidance. A couple points I want to point out here. One is that we envision this as a living document. So as we get feedback, as new licenses may be developed, we can always change the recommended licenses, add to them, take things off. But we wanted to put out some clear guidance to start so that entities that want to implement it today can go ahead and move forward. The other thing is in that second bullet point there, we say entities that share open unrestricted data. So this is, as Marie Francois mentioned, the GEO principles, data sharing principles, acknowledge that there could be reasons for restricting data access. Right? There could be GEO members could have laws, domestic laws that apply, national security considerations. Also, as was mentioned earlier, the CARE principles and other principles that are developing could indicate reasons for not sharing data. So this is sort of downstream from that, if you think of it. If you've made the determination that you are able to release the data legally, consistent with policy, other considerations, at that point, then apply one of these licenses. So we're not attempting to influence a decision as to whether data are appropriately open or not. I believe this is my last slide. I just want to note that GEO is holding an Open Data, Open Knowledge workshop next month in Geneva, and we will be having a full afternoon session on this topic. So if you want to hear more on this topic, I encourage you to register if you're able to join us. We're going to have an introduction similar to what I just gave here to the licensing guidance, but then we're going to hear from data providers and data users across government, industry, and international sectors about their experience with data licensing. And then we're going to have breakout sessions following that, where we seek the audience's input on challenges to and the benefits of adoption of the guidance, as well as the needed tools, resources, and trainings, because we really want this guidance to be implemented, right? It's not of much use if it's not implemented, and we realize there could be challenges. So this input from this session will really guide the law and policy subgroup, will guide our work for the next few months as we attempt to facilitate implementation. So with that, I'll turn it back to Bente.
Thank you very much, Derek. Now, we are going to look on open data and open access from the Indigenous Alliance perspective. So James Rattling Leaf Senior is with us. Hello, James.
Yes. Yeah,
Hi.
good day.
So while you are, can you introduce yourself as I am preparing to share the screen with your slide deck?
Yes. Well, let me begin by introducing myself in my Lakota language and culture. We say, Hawidakiapi Chante Westanape Chizapalo, James Rattling Leafy Machiape na Sichango Lakota Oyate Hemataha. I greet you today from my heart with a handshake. I am known as James Rattling Leaf. I am from the Rosebud Sioux tribe, or also Sichango Lakota Oyate, here in the United States of America. And I'm coming from the homelands of the Coeur d'Alene people here in Idaho, USA. And so my internet might not be that great. So what I'll do is I'll turn off my slide, my video, and Bente will run my slides for me. I appreciate that, Bente. And thank you again for the opportunity to be with you. I am one of the founders of the GEO Indigenous Alliance. About 3 years ago, we met at the Ministerial Summit in Canberra, Australia. And that's where I got to meet other Indigenous folks around the world. We got to share our programs with each other and began to think about what role can we play in supporting the group on Earth observations effort, but also how do we work with our own communities to provide and to work with Earth observations. So we're happy to be with you here today in this dialogue, and appreciate again our opportunity to share our thoughts on open data and open science. So next slide, please. So as again, we come from an Indigenous perspective. As I mentioned, my tribe and other tribes around the world, have been working for many, many years to support and develop and implement the rights of Indigenous people. In that, we as an organization, we know that the importance of Indigenous knowledge is becoming more and more of a critical element in work like global climate change. So we in our values as an organization say we need to and also promote the idea of respecting Indigenous knowledge. Number one, Indigenous data sovereignty is a second value that we promote. The importance of tribes, Indigenous people, and how we work with our own data, how we share that data with others in terms of research and development, but also, developing our own capacity to manage and curate and archive our own data. Again, through our values, we promote this idea of collective benefit, which is part of the CARE principles that we'll talk about today as well. But again, having an understanding the importance of our values as we see this information, this knowledge, it should be for the benefit not just of individuals but everybody. The fourth point I want to share here with this slide is prioritize consultation. I'm glad that we are brought here today, but it's not, sometimes it's not the case. Indigenous people have been an afterthought for many years in terms of what we bring to these discussions and to these programs. And so we continue to be advocates for Indigenous participation in these kind of programs like GEO and others. And so we'll continue to advocate for that, but also bring knowledge and bring our perspectives to this work. Next slide. So, we do believe and we do coordinate and we do better align ourselves with global events like UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. So that's important. That's an important framework that I think GEO needs to consider and to better understand how that may work with this work. Again, we believe that we want to be partners in this work, but it has to be based on, again, on equality and equity. We believe that our data governance frameworks, again, are important in terms of representation and how we make decisions. Protocols and guidelines of how we work with our worldviews and our collection of data is really important. How we do this work and the way we do the work, the process is very important. We also understand that our capacity is still in a process where we need to be. So we'll continue to do that, but we do that with full participation of the people we work with from the beginning. And we know that because of things like climate change, we understand that these are long-term efforts. And we have a long view, a long vision of how we work with each other, but not only as Indigenous people, but with our partners. So that's important when we talk about that, and also how we measure and understand our progress and our partnerships. That's important as well. Next slide. So we have one of our founders also is Mario Shakim from the Amazon, and he says we need to center Indigenous knowledge and perspectives in the data process and prioritize Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty over their data. So there is a movement, a global movement to promote and advocate for Indigenous rights and Indigenous on their lands and their waters, and now more importantly also with our data and also with our knowledge. So that's a quote, and we support that. And next slide. So part of this work again is to align and to work with other entities working on data. So what you see here are the FAIR principle and the CARE principle. The first one is FAIR, which is findable, access. It's interoperable and reusable. But then there was a great effort from Indigenous scholars who said, we also need to bring this idea of a CARE principle, which is collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And I think these are key points that we have to work in. I know that as we've seen it, as I work with these principles with Indigenous people, we know that there's some complexity to this work, and our hope always is to stay engaged with these principles. Again, CARE, I mentioned earlier, as Indigenous people, we know that the work we do is for the benefit of our people. Authority control, in the past, we've never had authority a lot of times over our data and over our research working in our own community and our land. So this is to address that, to change that. Responsibility, and ethics, the last two, R&E, those are things I really don't hear too much about in my work in the Geodigital Alliance, but also with data science. But I think it's important that we bring these two words together, these two values together, and to help us understand, again, what is our responsibility to these communities we work in, and also to foster a high level of ethics in how we work with each other, how we work with our knowledges, and how we work in a way that is a collective benefit to all, not just Indigenous people. So these are discussions that we have ongoing already within the Geodigital Alliance. We hope that in this work that we can continue to develop a pathway for education and awareness with these principles. And our hope is that the GEO community would embrace these ideas, embraced the idea of building our own capacity to work with us at GEO to do things like workshops and to raise the visibility of these principles within the work that we do. So if we don't understand it, we don't know it, then let's figure out together how we can advance that knowledge in these important times so that Indigenous people can benefit from GEO, can benefit from the licenses that we're hearing, benefit from the open knowledge and things like that. So that's our hope, and that's why we're here. We want to have these conversations and be part of these dialogues to create better understanding. Is there any more slides here, Bente? Next slide. Okay, so I want to thank you again. That's my contact information as well as our partner Diana Mastrati as well. And we're looking forward to the dialogue. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James. I will stop sharing. These slides will be made available. And you can also share the emails in the chat. So now we have heard what we call some strategies or the theoretical part of it, if you like, and some perspectives. Now we are going to look at the success story on the importance of these principles of sharing openly, and that's you, Pete. So you will talk about open data and open access in practice from a humanitarian OpenStreetMap success story, and it's a very meaningful, of course, application of these principles. So, Pete, I give the floor to you, and please introduce yourself a little bit first, and then we will listen to your presentation.
Okay, cool. Thank you, and thanks to James and Derek for the interesting talks. So my name's Pete Masters. I work for the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. Short version is HOT, which always looks kind of weird even to me in these things where it says HOT Pete Masters underneath my face. I have been working for HOT for about 2 to 3 years, but I have been working with HOT for nearly a decade now, starting with work at Médecins Sans Frontières, or MSF, through the Missing Maps project. So I've been in and around the open geo data for humanitarian, I'm not sure you call it a sector, but in and around that community, that crowd, for a long time. So you've introduced this, Bente, as a success story, but I think it's all relative, right? We think we can be we still have lots of room for improvement. So I don't want to come across as someone who thinks it's a done deal. So just want to caveat this talk with that. But I do want to provide some examples of where open data, open access have had some kind of impact in a humanitarian or social change context. So in case you're not aware of what HOT is, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, as I guess you can surmise, is a organization that contributes largely to the OpenStreetMap database, and started off very much as a humanitarian project, as a volunteer project. It's now an organization with staff and budgets, etc. But in 2010, it was a bunch of OpenStreetMap geeks who thought they could do geo better for humanitarian. We have kind of a vision statement here, which is community needs are addressed through mapping. Everyone can access and contribute to the map, and open map data is available and used for impact. So I'm just showing you this just to frame the talk in case you don't know who HOT is. So I'm going to start with activations and emergencies, as this is probably what HOT is most famous for. So activations is what we call a disaster response through data. So I'm going to use the recent Turkey-Syria earthquake and show some examples from that. So generally, what happens after a disaster happens, if the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team community mobilizes, which is the activation, is basically lots of people do a lot of mapping. So there's software that has been built around the OpenStreetMap platform. There's software that HOT maintains and builds that coordinates large-scale remote mapping, usually from satellite imagery, occasionally from drone imagery or other imagery. there's tons of mapping, there's tons of organizing of events. People get together in solidarity, essentially, with the people affected by a particular disaster. What's the actual impact of this? So I'm going to give you a few examples. This isn't comprehensive, but the data is used a lot in coordination and analysis. So you can see here three different maps that were used during the actual response. The one on the far right, I think, is particularly interesting because that's a map that's printed out and on the wall of the Turkish Search and Rescue Association's kind of headquarters in the field. And all of these include OpenStreetMap data that's been contributed by volunteers and is being used for some kind of coordination or analysis purpose. Then there's actual operational decision making. So these two examples are kind of nice. They're quite different. They're both from Turkish doctors. And so the first on the left is a doctor who was the public health lead in one of the big tent camps that people moved to when their houses were destroyed or not safe enough to live in. And he worked closely with the Turkish OpenStreetMap community and HOT to develop a map of the camp itself, and they really used that as a fundamental tool in their public health response. So essentially using it for spatial epidemiology, for logistics, all sorts. It was so useful that the government kind of found out about it, asked to share it, and then it was used to install electricity and used for tons of different stuff. The doctor on the right, this is actually right after the earthquake happened. He and I think 12 colleagues went to support people who were injured in the earthquake. Connectivity was out, so Google Maps, which they were relying on, was gone, and so they used organic maps, which is an app on your phone that you can download OpenStreetMap data to and use offline and contribute to. So he and his doctor colleagues were able to get where they needed to go and start treating people. Beyond the specific example of Syria and Turkey, aid organizations have, I think it's fair to say, in the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a real change in the perspective of open data and to some extent open knowledge in aid organizations. In 2014, it was really unusual to see OpenStreetMap used kind of as a standard in NGOs. Nowadays, it's not. And this is a comment from about a month ago from an agency called HIAS. And this guy basically unprompted, so we haven't worked with them. He just got in touch to say, this is brilliant. I'm working in Chad. There's no other data. This is fantastic. And I just wanted to include this one, but it's not kind of an example of an operational use case, but this is a comment from a friend and colleague in the British Red Cross, Andrew. And the Missing Maps project is a project that was founded by MSF, 2 Red Cross societies and HOT. And it essentially was kind of the project that really changed the way that NGOs used OpenStreetMap and open and participatory mapping in their responses. And I think his point is particularly relevant to open data and open knowledge, because that open knowledge table is a table around which you can bring a really diverse group of people. So for him, as a Red Cross person, he said it was kind of unprecedented that he could sit down with MSF and a university and a community group and have like a shared understanding, a shared culture. But the open culture of HOT and OpenStreetMap really provided that. So I thought that was a useful quote. Lastly, to move from the kind of classic humanitarian response to what HOT's been trying to do in the last couple of years is a much more localized approach. So we've started hubs in 4 different regions to try and move decision making and money and support much closer to the people in the countries where we want to work. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of kind of smaller scale humanitarian work, much more local. So this one's with an organization called Canoa da Tolda. They're an environmental advocacy group in Brazil, based in the São Francisco River Basin, where there have been, over the past decades, there have been dams implemented, and the pattern of the water has changed, and the way the landscape can deal with flooding has changed. And these people have been advocating for and trying to develop better flood response planning. And using open data and open knowledge from other places, they were actually able to put together a really, really interesting workflow to actually map and model the area and be able to provide data to support advocacy and flood risk planning at a local level. And all of that has now been published openly as well. So their workflow, their tech is all available for others to adapt or to copy. Another interesting recent one is Hasiru Aqua in India. So, oh, sorry.
Hi, this is
so this is an Indian NGO who support inland farmers to cultivate fish to try and feed people and also to generate income for the farmers. And they used an app called MapSwipe, which again generates open data. Essentially, you can see that picture in the top middle. People swipe through a satellite imagery and they tap to identify where they see a specific type of feature. So in this case, Hasiru Aqua were looking for ponds that are potential sites for farmers to cultivate fish. And I think within a matter of weeks, they found I don't know the exact number. I know it's more than 10,000. And each of those ponds can potentially support a metric ton of fish per year. I don't know the maths of how much is actually possible, but like the in theory, that's a lot of fish, a lot of people fed, and a lot of income. And this is a local Indian NGO leaning on open technology and open data that comes out of it, and a participatory mapping approach. So I thought that was also an interesting example. And I think that's my last slide. So I'll stop there. Oh, sorry. sorry. Peer support and knowledge exchange within the OpenStreetMap community and the kind of humanitarian mapping communities is fundamental. We just had a community working group meeting on Tuesday. There's a whole bunch of young OpenStreetMap communities in the Caribbean who wanted to learn from more mature OpenStreetMap communities. And so they all met in the community working group. And this peer support and knowledge exchange was a fundamental piece of the puzzle, a fundamental piece of the discussion. So conferences, wikis, diary posts, all of this stuff is how people learn in these communities. So I thought I just mentioned that at the end.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, thank you, Bob, for that question. I guess, from my perspective, I'd say, it's like, it's dealing with the past. How do you reconcile, the past events that happened within communities when working with data, and how do you deal with, those stories of researchers coming in and collecting data on the tribal lands or resources or on people, and then taking that and publishing it and benefiting from that, whereas a community really never received or understood or even knew that happened. I think that's a big one. And I think, for instance, in Canada, they have something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the whole country there has been working for many years now trying to understand how they deal with the past injustices, if you will. Strong word, I know, but that's how Indigenous people see it. And I think we need processes going forward, to deal with that. A lot of times people would say, well, that was the past, James. It really doesn't matter now. And we're in the future now, or we're better people, we're better organizations now. We understand you as Indigenous people better. So why can't we just forget that? And so I think, there's a human side of this dimension. And I'm so glad that, it's not all about data or technology or science. I'm always reminded, when we come to meetings, when I work with science organizations or universities, when they see me show up, they know that in a way that they're reminded of the human part of this work, the impact of this work on people, and especially with ethics. So when you work with us, in a way, we're going to bring our ethical values, our ethical worldviews of how we work with one another, how we deal with conflict, and how we apply technology and science to the issues that we want to address, and to what degree and understanding, how that benefits. So we're still living in a world of inequity. And the challenge is, how do you address that? Because people would say, well, that's the past. That's not me. I didn't do that. That was somebody else. Well, that doesn't help. That doesn't further the conversation. That doesn't address that. So I think that us as having the opportunity to lead these programs, it is a responsibility. That's why I think the FAIR principle, CARE principle, has responsibility in that term. There was a reason for that, because we know that there are bad actors, and I think sometimes as Indigenous people, we know that, but at the same time we know that the issue. So we have to find things where we can agree on, and I think one thing we all know is that we have to change. The issues before us are so great now that we need collective action and collective benefit. So those are some things that I think are very difficult to overcome, and the challenge before us. But I think as a collective, and I'm hopeful that GEO as a community will recognize that, will really think deeply about the UNDRIP principles. And that's another challenge, I think, too, Robert, is how do you work with the UNDRIP principles in terms of GEO? What's the connection between UNDRIP and open data, open science, open knowledge? That's why these conversations are important that we're having today, is having those discussions and raising it and elevating them within all GEO. So it's not just one component of GEO that's going to talk about UNDRIP or Indigenous people. We're a volunteer group at GEO Indigenous Alliance, so we can only do the best we can with our time. We all have other jobs, but we know that the issues are so big or so important that we'll come on the call today and show up. So those are some thoughts, Robert, and thank you for the question.
May I follow up on that? Because I was thinking in practical terms. Now, in modern times, if you like, we have machine to machine, we are transferring information, data and information from machine to machine. Now, one thing is the data that Indigenous people possess. Another thing is actually condensed or aggregated data and knowledge. How do you license? I mean, is there a way we could license and give credit to that type of knowledge that is collected and restored or in a repository? Is like it's different. It's, first of all, is not digital, but how can you make that transfer? It seems like giving credit and respect for what is historical, a special type of historical data and information, in my view. Have this been discussed in practical terms, just to bridge what Derek has been talking about and what you are talking about?
Right. Well, I think that's we can only do I mentioned before, as we can do. But I'm hoping that in this coming year, the GEO Indigenous Science will foster those kind of dialogues, within ourselves. Those questions, Bente, they're good questions. I mean, that's what we have. Machine learning and all those are in front of us right now. The cat is out of the bag. I'm not sure we're going to put the cat back in the bag, but what do we do with that cat now? And I think that's all our challenges, not just Indigenous people. But I know that there's progress, right? That's why I'm here. I've seen progress in my work both at the international level in terms of climate change and how we work with Indigenous people. I think those are good lessons, and I really like the open street mapping presentation as well. Seeing the community there represented and having their support and agreement in that work is great. And the diversity of Indigenous people as well is recognized. We're not, I mean, obviously we're not all the same. And so our challenge is that, we need more Indigenous AI scientists. We need a workforce that understands the technology to respond, deeply into your question, Bente. So I think we all need to come together to build that future workforce for Indigenous people with Indigenous people. But we need those skills too in terms of machine learning and create those economic opportunities as well. So I think the challenge for us, I think, but the opportunity is to build a holistic approach to this question that we're having, and we need to do it now. And we need to bring those universities together, the community together to just what kind of curriculum do we need to build a workforce that can delve deeply into those questions, and also bring our ethics to it, right? Should we do this or should we do it? So it's a great question, and we'll keep going.
Yeah, thank you for the question. My co-chair, Dr. Leah Shanley, had much more experience on the subject than I did. So she was great at connecting us to some members of the GeoData Alliance, or Indigenous Alliance. So we did an informal sort of consultation on the text, and we included some statement. I voiced over this subject just to note that that we do not intend for this licensing guidance to apply writ large to all data, irrespective of principles such as the CARE principles. But so that mention was included as a result and based on our informal collaboration with the Indigenous Alliance. We are always looking for more members, and so we have a pretty small group, but we welcome all members, especially again as we look in this next year to start discussing the guidance we have to see if we need to add to it, amend it, and then also to develop implementation tools, right? So I'd welcome any and all participation as well. So as we try to develop guidance that can be used across the entire GEO community.
Yeah, what struck me when you were listing the licenses, it's not it's and the guidance that's already there. I think we need some capacity development in understanding and implementing those guidelines as well. I've heard examples where that even with when you are creating, for instance, a digital twin that I'm working on, you put many different types of data with many different types of open licenses even. And it's not a given that when you stack open licenses on top of each other, you can actually, control the openness afterwards. So there's like, the devil's in the detail here.
That's a great question. I think I would say, because this is I think the collective part of CARE needs to be acknowledged again. And I think it'd be great as a follow-up to this is to have a general discussion on that question and work with us as a GeoDigital to bring Indigenous perspectives, people who can really address those general data protection regulations you're mentioning, Maria, in the chat. I think that's a next step. I'm not that comfortable to say exactly if that's a good idea or not, but I think continue the conversation, bringing the right people together to address that question, to inform this group and GEO would be another good step. And I would be willing to help with that plan. So that'd be my response.
Personally, no, I guess the closest I've the closest I've come personally to like experiencing these kinds of issues is whilst working for MSF when doing field mapping. So actually traveling and collecting place names, you know, health assets. So collecting point data on that stuff. And we would always ask, when you arrive at a village, like if people are happy to be represented on the map, which is complicated in the first place, because who do you ask if there's 1,000 people? Like, so we have definitely twice I've experienced where people have said we do not want to be represented, so we have not taken any point data. We've moved on. So I guess that's the closest we've come. I've come to experiencing that kind of. I guess it's about data sovereignty and representation. I think in heart at the moment, like our approach is much more to work with people who want to leverage the data themselves. So I know we're working with an indigenous youth community in South America around mapping for, I think it's around economic development. They're super keen on drones and open drone technology. So we're kind of the conversations now really happen in a much deeper level before HOT actually does anything, and then we do it with the people we're working with locally. So I guess we haven't probably haven't confronted that kind of dilemma in the last couple of years because of that approach.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is actually a really interesting convergence of topics as a part of this session in, talking about, coming out of the law and policy guidelines, focusing on really the elements of the underlying principles associated with the existing licenses that are being recommended in terms of their understanding and interoperability and the way that they meet the open science, open data objectives. And my comment in the chat is related to the need that I potentially see in terms of looking for additional, what I would describe as standardized licenses that have some of those same beneficial characteristics that we have with, for example, some of the Creative Commons licenses that are highly reusable and easily understood, but having licenses that also bring in the necessary information and requirements that represent the values and principles related to care, in terms of specifically providing the information about with whom potential users of those data should consult on appropriate and shared beneficial use. What other conditions may be applicable? Being able to potentially embed in those licenses some of the emerging standards for representing traditional knowledge and information about the existing cultural values and restrictions that may relate to those data, but having a standardized approach in those licenses that both make them reusable and understandable, but also then make clear and explicit what additional requirements or restrictions may be associated with those data.
Yeah, that's, I think this is emerging, that we are actually in need of developing updated standards for licensing to capture this care principles, for instance, in short. I mean, and this is a community, as I understand, when you're developing a new standard, it's a community effort where you have best practices or good practices, and then you try to converge towards something that it's accepted in the communities. Yeah.
And I had previously been primarily thinking about this in terms of metadata content, the information that we have in our metadata associated with our shared data, to ensure that there's information about the data that reflect the ethical and consultative characteristics of those data. But this discussion today has really triggered for me the need to extend that into what would hopefully be a standardized licensing model as well.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to Carl's comment, and I think that is an interesting concept, and I'm glad I think we have a representative from Creative Commons here who maybe could help us with that effort. But I would just note, I think there's sort of two elements, or I think about this in two ways, right? One, going back to the GEO data sharing principles, that really talks about full and open and unrestricted access, subject to some known caveats, right? So I've been wondering whether we either need to interpret those principles in light of the CARE principles to see if that's, how that fits into that process, or do we need to make some tweaks to the GEO data sharing principles to reflect these ethical and data sovereignty concerns, right? So I think that's one part that we can do in GEO, is to look at the GEO data sharing principles. And then that's an interesting idea. So I think the licenses that we've proposed, especially the Creative Commons attribution, explicitly allows the data provider to maintain ownership, right? And it requires attribution. So that gets at, I think, some of the concerns from data providers, not just from the Indigenous community, but others, but not all concerns, right? So other Creative Commons licenses address things like non-commercial use or requiring others to provide derived products under a similar open license. But yeah, I'm not aware, to Carl's point, of any standard licenses that say you can use these for all these purposes, but you must consult with us first, right? So I wonder if you could develop some additional condition that's more standard, so not like a non-commercial condition, but something that reflects the principles reflected in the CARE principles, and then we'd see how that fits within the GEO context. But I think that is helpful. Sometimes if you're too stringent on conditions, if you say no conditions are allowed, you can't share data unless it's fully open, you might lose access to some data that somebody would be willing to share if they had some restriction. So it's a hard balance, because GEO is founded again on unrestricted access, and once you start to introduce restrictions, it could be a slippery slope. But I think it's a good time to maybe start considering that, especially in light of the issues raised by the Indigenous Alliance.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, just in response to that, this is exactly why I'm grateful to be in attendance, and thank you to Derek for inviting me, because we're at the moment in our work right now where we're considering this. So it's lovely to be in attendance, and apologies that I'm not able to join with my video today, but hopefully that will be sorted for next time. But this has been a very, very helpful conversation, and grateful to be able to contribute how we can. So just to comment, historically what we've been considering for Creative Commons licenses is terms that will be compatible with international copyright laws. So that's always been kind of our starting point, our grounding point. But as we consider this new era, and specifically licensing that is most compatible for climate data sets and geospatial data sets that allow us to help people solve climate change, then we have to think more broadly about what those licenses might need to entail. So to your exact point, Carl, the principles that exist they exist for a reason, and they're at the top of our priority list as we consider how that might evolve, even in our own licensing practices moving forward. So more to come. We haven't made any decisions yet, but these are the exact conversations that are helpful as we hopefully collectively kind of think of how that will come to play. And my hope is that I can continue to leverage the insights of this group here and other folks that you might be connected to help us figure that out together.
Excellent. Welcome to the community, Taylor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Marie-Françoise, now you.
Yes, I was going into the same direction recently. So first, I have to acknowledge that Pete has presented some use cases related to disasters, but I am ending a project where we develop we develop 38 applications and more than 10%. I think it's 4 or 5 were using OpenStreetMap because it was just open and available and they were not related to disasters. So what I mean is that this data has a lot of societal value and can be very much reused because it's completely open. But I have also been recently into a symposium about data spaces in Europe, and where the keyword was sovereignty. So what I understood is that, okay, you can emphasize full and open data, and this is very much a trend in the public area, including in Europe, where there are some directives from the European Commission that all the data that has been created with public funds should be open. But then we don't have to deny that there is a huge amount of data that the owners want to keep, where they want to keep the control. And this sovereignty term could also be related to the request from the CARE principles. They want to be able to understand what is done with the data and who are using them. But these are the parts of the licenses which are lost into a PDF, which is not at all standardized, and where very few people read all the details because it's very often expressed into terminologies which are more legal but read by technical people. So after some pages, and very often it's not short documents, but extended documents, extensive documents. So this is why I think you could create guidances that you say are quite simple, direct. It's a small step for a lawyer. It's a big step for the scientists and the developers. But I think that if we manage to standardize a bit all these sovereignty aspects and restriction aspects, and I'm really glad to know that Creative Commons, who have made such a good job with the CC BY and CC considering that, I think we would maybe be able to access far more data, which is also something we try to encourage in GEO, to share the data as much as you can. And the climate changes we have ahead are really needing more and more data. So we have to address this sovereignty and restrictions aspects in the best way we can to be able to access more data, to make sure that the artificial intelligence applications that are here to use a lot of data are producing results really based on a huge amount of data, because what would be terrible is to run artificial intelligence on few data, because these are the only ones which are open, because in this case, the results would be poor, but we will not be able to criticize the quality of the results, because the complexity of the artificial intelligence might make us give us our time to control if the results are really valid and on what they are based. So I think that if we want to go towards artificial intelligence, we have to make sure that these algorithms have as many data as possible, so not only fully open data. This was more or less.
Yeah, thank you, Marie-Françoise. I have questions for Pete, but I'll let Bob the floor first.
Oh, well, thank you again, Bente. First, before I ask my question, though, I would like to say that the points that Marie-Françoise is making about the artificial intelligence are certainly coming to the forefront here as the developments in the technology are improving. And I think that has great implications for the issues for like the indigenous interests in a particular data, especially as James was mentioning, the data that have already been released in the past, because then they can be parsed by various artificial intelligence engines, and even more damage could be done. But my question, so I want to thank you, Marie-Françoise, for raising that. But my question is really more in terms of these indigenous rights that we're talking about, and I guess it is another approach that might be different than the licensing approach, and that is to think about it in terms of the way that we currently have protections for human subjects research that are in many countries, and in fact, for instance, in the U.S., when somebody's doing research in another country, we require that they get the local approval of that. And so in a way, I think this has some similarities in that if you're doing research on an indigenous population, whether you consider it to be human subjects research or not, maybe it really is human subjects research to some extent. And then I think also this should be perhaps extended to the lands themselves, because those there are other rights associated with those that are not necessarily recognized either legally or by the researchers who are conducting such research. So I guess that was more of a comment than a question. But yeah, any thoughts in that direction would certainly be welcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. And I just love the way we are spending a lot of time of sharing ideas and thoughts here. And this is recorded, of course, so we will be able to follow up later. So this is working just fine.
Okay, big question. So I guess maybe a good starting point is conflict. So geographical data in conflict can be weaponized very easily. And so, for example, the humanitarian mapping, we do not activate during live conflict. So in fact, there was a really interesting occurrence, because with the Russian invasion in Ukraine, that was an invasion in a country that had a very strong OpenStreetMap community. And lots of people, lots of individuals started mapping Ukraine in solidarity, just off their own backs, you know, as a kind of an altruistic act, I guess. And the Ukrainian community came together and produced a statement to say, please do not map Ukraine. Like, we've already seen evidence of Russian maps that incorporate OpenStreetMap data. We do not want to improve those maps. So that's a really obvious example. It becomes tricky very quickly, because I remember an example from when I worked at MSF, when I was contacted because of my involvement with the Missing Maps project by a Syrian doctor saying, please remove my hospital from this map. It will be targeted. And we had nothing to do with adding the hospital. It'd been added years ago in OpenStreetMap when Syria was in peacetime. But like, obviously these data assets, their meaning changes with the context in a place. So I guess like, we've been talking about the care principle. We hold very dear the do no harm principle, and we try and consider like the downstream consequences. We try and consider the unintended consequences. We actually have a bunch of frameworks we use to try and analyze the risk of a certain type of mapping, both for the mappers themselves who are going out in the field, but also for the people who live in that particular place. So yeah, you have to. There's no guarantee that the data that you create will not be used for purposes that you wouldn't want it to be used for. So it's like in much of humanitarian work, it's a decision that you have to take on an ongoing basis. I just wanted to comment maybe on the data sovereignty aspect. I think there's a relevant project from a group called Slum Dwellers International, which is a a big network of slum dweller communities who had a big mapping project called Know Your City. And it really it made me think of the conversation that's just been had, because one of the key reasons they launched this project was to own and control their own data on slums. And the theory was that data should be a community asset. It shouldn't be something that's collected by the people. The community should own it, and they should decide who uses it, what for, etc., etc. And this was largely a really successful project. And it's actually being relaunched now, which is kind of why I know about it. We're consulting with them at the moment, because an interesting thing happened when COVID hit, and suddenly communities were like, well, we have all this data that would be super useful for people responding, but it's not in a place where we can get it to people. The way that they did the data collection and storage meant that actually it was very much owned and very safe, but it couldn't be used by people. It couldn't be made open very easily. So I just thought that was an interesting. They're now looking at relaunching the project and seeing how to integrate open data approaches, OpenStreetMap into that. So I just thought that was interesting. And the last thing, I'm just going to pop a link in the chat because AI was mentioned, and just wanted to flag this project, which is around AI assisted mapping, where communities themselves define the model the AI uses to do the mapping. So I just thought it was an interesting, people might be interested.
Thanks. Just one comment. I think the example that Pete raised on conflict was helpful for me to think through this. And I think I would just note, in some cases, a license may be able to help, or maybe a new modified license. Other cases, I think it's not a licensing problem. And I'm thinking the conflict one is probably not a licensing one. You're not going to write a license that says, the Russians can't use this, right? You just have to pull it down. So I think that is important to keep in mind, that licenses are a tool for a specific purpose. They can help some things, but they can't help everything. So some of these issues, they might still be within the scope of our subgroup. So again, I would encourage anybody interested to join, but they might not be something that a license can address. So I think we just keep that in mind.
It's scary, right? The increase in these kinds of events is scary, and I'll be totally honest. Like during the hurricane cyclone seasons in various places, HOT is overwhelmed. We are unable to keep up with the number of activations, and that only gets worse and worse. What we're able to provide from satellite imagery is, like, to be honest, it's fairly limited. We can help people understand what the situation was before the event itself. If there's up-to-date satellite imagery, if their image is shot afterwards, we can help with like a comparison of like what the situation looks like afterwards. But yeah, it's obviously a scary phenomenon for a whole bunch of reasons. But it's why the AI thing is interesting, because at the moment the AI, it's not AI assisted, the AI led mapping. There's various initiatives from Facebook, from Microsoft. They're not very good. we tried to use it during the Turkey Syria earthquake, and it cost us. It was a net loss in time and efficiency, which was a real sad thing. My personal opinion is they shouldn't have released that data set. It wasn't good enough. They didn't test it well enough, and it actually cost us time. However, like, as these things become better, like there will be an efficiency gain at some point. Who knows when? I guess one of the questions that we always have on the humanitarian side of things is, it depends also where the cyclone is, because especially when we're talking about AI, like lots of the models are trained in places where the AI is being developed. That doesn't work for, I don't know, a village in Central African Republic or a village on the coast in Indonesia. So yeah, it's a frightening thing, and I'm not sure what to add, rather than the technology needs to be more locally appropriate as it's developed. And which is why maybe you're interested in the link I shared for the FAIR project, where a community can train its own AI to assist it in mapping. Yeah.